Okay, so back in ZBrush again. We need to create a bark texture for our tree. Select cube, go to edit, then make polymesh 3D, then Dynamesh. This same process from before. Here I'm checking my reference, my style guide. Just going to bring this up, take a look at what my goal is. If you'll notice, it's a very vertical bark. I really like the way this looks. In ZBrush, we're just going to get a start. We'll probably finish it up in Substance in the future, but for now, that's a good idea. So it's a lot of vertical strips. So I'm going to basically start using Dynamesh, move topological to get basically bark strip shapes. It can be pretty messy, it's fine. We're going to keep working this texture. Stuff like barks and rock textures get redone a bunch in the game. So this will just be a good way to get a texture on our plants, proof of concept and UDK and everything. And then we can just keep iterating as we get more time in future weeks. So here I'm using Crumple Brush with like a scatter alpha and just nudging around, re-dynameshing it, and just kind of keep trying to break up the shape. I like it with a square alpha. Just looks more kind of natural. As you can see here, it's already starting to look a little bit like a bark, but it's a more complicated texture in general because it has a lot of smooth and chunky bits, and we need to make this not so obviously tile. Here I'm using Trim Dynamic. It's a great way to swap between Z-add and Z-sub to kind of try and find a balance of frantic, noisy, rough texture and smooth shapes. And I'm just rotating it around because I'm probably going to use this thing similar to the way you create a brick. This is actually very similar to the way you create a brick, except you just don't crumple it quite as much and you don't make it quite as organic looking. See, this side could just as easily morph into a super old ancient brick, but for now I'm just going to kind of try and keep looking at my reference on the left screen and just chipping away where it gets a little bit too noisy, because I want these faces to feel a little bit flatter, and just keep sort of adjusting, adding, subtracting. If it gets kind of messed up, you can Dynamesh, inflate, flatten it out, not a problem. And just kind of keep going back and forth here. I'm adding a little bit to fill in some spaces, then back to Z-sub, and then remove a little bit here and there. Some of these faces are starting to come together, like this is starting to look nice. That looks kind of like a bark chunk. I'm going to go back to the move tool, nudge it down a little bit more. See, it's kind of just like this spear, bark spear. Rotate it around, kind of nudge that shape a bit. It's looking pretty nice. I think that could be a good start. A little bit longer. I might even have to go back and make even longer ones later on. I don't know, because those are really long strips. Control drag to Dynamesh. Since we moved it, it probably messed up a lot of the topology, but by going back and Dynameshing it, then crumpling it, we can add more detail back to those spaces that got all stretched out. See how quickly that kind of filled in that detail. Go back to the move brush again, nudge it some more, try to just sort of get more of a spear shape, so it can kind of like, when you lay it out on your sheet, they'll kind of weave in and out of each other. You don't want it to be perfectly rectangular because none of these shapes do that. They're all a lot more random and crazy. Go back to your crumple brush, do another pass, sort of the back and forth flow, just like usual. And then drag. This is actually similar to how we'll make rocks, except we'll be making plates and then offsetting those. We'll be doing rocks, a stone or rock tiling texture next week, and then we'll be applying those. So anyway, back to this. We inflated, and then we're Dynameshing the part that got kind of messed up. Turn Dynamesh on and off. Adjust the resolution a little bit if it was too high. And I'm just simplifying these shapes. Obviously we go back and forth between crumple, adding and removing shapes to try and get randomness and happy accidents. See, this is starting to feel very natural, but there's a frequency there that's just too much. So I'm just removing some of that frequency, flattening some of that out, adding a few maybe more organic round shapes here and there, along with, you know, chiseled, cut, sharp, rectangular shapes. Just faceting some of this stuff, trying to remove some of the artifacting and weird bugs that happen when you sort of go crazy with this geometry. Here I'm just doing this side right here, just faceting that side, just remove some of the frequency there, flatten that out. That actually looks quite a bit like bark. And just go through, flatten it out. It's looking pretty good. So now I'm going to speed this way up because we've seen this process a bunch, and just going to continue working this shape. Once I get something that we like, I'm probably going to move on to starting to lay out the texture. Just double check the silhouette, make sure it's not too straight, make sure your ins and outs from the top and bottom, the angles look nice. Like see there, that one kind of flattens out. Probably should have angled that a bit more. This one goes up, that one goes down to the right. Get kind of some knobs and blobs and valleys and peaks and noisy and flat areas here that I think are all going to work out really nicely. The randomness is going to definitely help mask some of the repetition. Here I'm saving it back out because I'm pretty happy with that. So I think that's going to work okay. Here I'm just double checking my reference. And now I'm just going to do one more pass. I think it was a little bit too round there. I noticed that in the reference, the bark kind of like bows in a little bit, so I did a pass where I sort of made it a bit more concave so that the edges come out a bit, but the inside sort of rolls in a little bit. So it's more of a concave shape. Okay, and then that's about the size I want. And then you can go to drag dot and then change your draw size to something that seems like it'll work okay. So I think that's not too bad. And that way you can just undo, get a drag dot that's the right size you want, and just drag it in. And then once you get it there, just hit edit and rotate it around, move it up and down. And then that's how you start to lay out pretty much if you're doing boards or bricks or planks or bark in this case. Then if you're doing like a tiling rock texture, you get a bunch of like sort of circular plates and you just nudge them into each other like this. This seems like kind of maybe barbaric and simplistic, but not everything has to be super complex. This is a great way to get very natural textures. Like I said, these are maybe going to be a little bit too clean and perfect, so we're probably going to go into Substance now that we have that tool. Before, if we did it in ZBrush, it didn't turn out quite right. We were kind of stuck with it unless we want to redo it. But now I like to mix the two. I'll probably do a basic texture in ZBrush, and either this week or next week I'll go through and I'll run it through Substance. I'll do warps, I'll do transforms, color adjustment, scale adjustment, all that stuff. I think we'll get a better, and obviously like micro detail, we'll get a better texture overall. But for now, this is a great start. I'm just going through overlapping stuff, trying to break up repetition. Just continue to drag dot that in, and then edit, rotate, move, scale, and just try to offset the repetition. Checking my reference again. See, this isn't perfect. These almost do it kind of like, I don't know, like some sort of weird messed up stones. But it's going to take quite a few iterations to make something like a bark look natural because it's such a strange texture, such a strange material in general. A lot of it will be about how the roughness and color interact with each other, like moss blends and those sort of things. That's kind of like what sells it a lot. And then obviously breaking up the clean repetition here because these are all going in very vertical, perfect lines, which nature never does. I'm pretty happy with the breakup in terms of the shapes here, like these, the ins and outs of each individual bark chunk or whatever. I have had like maybe a few barks come together perfectly the first time, but almost everyone takes multiple iterations. I've noticed a lot of people have tried 3D scanning this stuff, and some of that works actually. Some of it can be pretty nice. You can get scanned stuff and then just basically bring in pieces and reuse those. What I'm doing here is I duplicated the layer where I'd flattened that on and I just offsetted it. Hold tilde and just move it away. See there, you can see the second layer. And then I'm just merging them. Right now, obviously, they're very similar, but as I overlap, as you can see here, that'll break up the repetition. So it's okay to get like one piece that works and then go through and just duplicate it around a few times, because you can always just overlap the shapes over and over, which is what we're going to be doing. See here, I'm moving it in and out of depth, trying to see how it interacts with the other pieces around it. And you can hit draw to drop it down if you're happy with it, or just switch. So here I'm moving. I don't really like the way it was terminating on the top, so I nudged that forward in space a little bit. Now I'm kind of starting to think about how these two are going to connect this one pillar detail and then the other there, because there's no guarantee that the width of the bark's going to line up perfectly, which maybe that'll force me to think more about it and come up with some clever solution. See there, I've got kind of a nice gap that starts adding interest. Some of these terminate on the top, some on the bottom. Overlapping shapes are starting to look nice. It's a lot of the same stuff in general. Going to speed this up because this is quite a long process as usual. So once again, I'm just nudging this stuff around. This is still like half speed. I'm actually going to save out a copy here because it's just really risky. There was a cut there. See, I saved it, and now it's at faster speed. Just continuing to offset these pieces. Checking my height map, you just hit grab dock or grab alpha to check it. As you can see, there's like higher and lower bits, so I'm trying to like balance the highs and lows, so there's not like one or two pieces that's just coming out too far and then the other ones are at a good balance. Just move these in and out. Okay, and just trying to break up the symmetry everywhere. This actually looks like a nice shingle texture right now, which is kind of bumming me out. Be a good shingle texture for a house, which isn't really what we're going for, but I guess the base is there, so if we get a good height map, we can just bring it into Substance and warp it, modify it, maybe repeat it a couple times, then break it up with like mid to small details. That's probably what we'll do, like do like little moss bits here and there. Here I'm just sort of like continuing to adjust it, fill out those spaces, trying to experiment with where I can nudge these things to break up the repetition. I think overall it's not terrible. It's not the best bar texture I've ever made in my life, but I think it's a good start. And once we do a few more passes on it, it'll be perfect. Here I'm just adding a flat plane on a new layer behind it, because since there's gaps, you're going to want to fill in that gap with just a plane and just nudge it in Z-depth so that it's as close as possible, once again, to get a good height map. See, that's not too bad, but also not overlap or lose shapes. Here I was experimenting with something that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. You just duplicate the bark texture and you offset it, and you see if you can get some nice results from that. Sometimes you can get very natural results. See there, that's actually, some of it actually was kind of nice because it creates a randomness and overlap that's actually kind of cool. I recommend trying that, but I think I decided not to go that route in the end. See here, just once again experimenting with it, but it was creating these weird artifacts where certain ones weren't quite lining up right. I was checking my reference, and it doesn't really have that look to it, so I ended up flattening it out, and then decided maybe fill in that section, and then undo. There you go, back to where it was. And what I'm going to do instead is just add more variety and shape and scale and randomness with the pieces I already have. I mean, another way to keep it from getting so samey, I guess, is to have made more pieces, but I didn't feel like doing that. Just a time thing. We have a lot of ground to cover here, so I just made one, and I was just trying to show you how far you can get with just one piece. So I want to basically go through, and through different scales and subtle rotations, see how much I can sort of break up that repetition there. You don't want to make it too obvious, like too huge of a variation, or put things that are too, like, let's say like do a hugely scaled up piece like right next to another one, because then that's going to just immediately draw the eye to it. This stuff still has to kind of sort of fall into the background. If you squint your eyes, you don't want any piece to really stand out that well. See here, I'm thinking about making it feel like that bark piece is a little bit longer, so I'm just nudging it down, and then here I'm filling in that piece. But what if like that blended in like that, and then it came around, filling this piece in here, moving it in and out in space, nudge it around. This overlapping is definitely starting to create a more natural look. Okay, and then just keep working the piece, filling pieces out, scaling it, rotating it, moving it around, seeing where they fit. Sometimes they don't work, and it's okay, just undo it. We can always go through and sort of blur these things too. What if that one kind of came out a little bit like that? I'm just going to scale this guy a little bit so it fits like that with a subtle adjustment there. And I think it would work better down here a little bit. So I'm just going to speed it up even more because there's a lot of the same stuff. And so it's always good to sort of offset the canvas a little bit so you're not looking at the exact same thing. And you're also making sure that, first of all, you don't have any weird things that somehow overlapped and cause the seam or that create too much repetition. So as you pan, holding tilde there, you can sort of start seeing, making sure that when it pans, nothing stands out too bad and there's not too much repetition going on, so that it feels relatively unique and natural on the whole thing. Because if you're gonna pay for a large scale texture, you might as well have every part of it be doing something in your favor, obviously. Because if it's doing something that's bad, like making a seam stand out, then that's not helping. Here I'm going to try breaking it up even more. Now that we have a nice variation on the vertical tiling, I'm going to do slight rotations to sort of try and get more of what was in the reference. See here, it's sort of tilted a little bit because the bark doesn't go perfectly up and down. It kind of twists around the tree sometimes at random intervals. So, you know, not all of them go in the exact same direction, but they do seem to go in patterns. See here, like that one kind of is rotated a little bit like that. See in the reference here, it goes up and down, and then part of it veers off to the left. There's a twist around the tree there. I guess it's just the flow of the way the tree grew. See here, starting to get a little bit more randomness, but if I don't supplement that and counteract that with other shapes, it's going to just stand out super bad when we put it in the game. So I'm trying to add other shapes into the texture that help this one to blend in, but also break up the verticality. See, just creating a counteractive shape here is going to help that one, so that as the eyes is drawn that way, and you go here, it'll be cutting back the other direction. To see adding counteractive ones without them twisting too much, because then it could be too much of a mess. But it's starting to feel less like bricks and more like something natural, because this is more like how natural things grow, never in like perfect lines unless they're like some really weird like mineral or something, which do create super weird, bizarre growth patterns. But even those usually have some sort of asymmetry and chaos, which is basically what we're infusing here. We're infusing chaos into our very static texture. And it's static because we're just trying to make it quick. But just working at it, constantly just iterating on it's going to just help that out. Actually, it would have been nice if we had one that was slightly bent, because you can see here there's more like almost like a knee bend. It's kind of like a hard angle bend. If it had been slightly smoother, it might have been nice. But in a way, just doing that and then counteracting it with this angle is kind of working well. So maybe it's going to be okay. You know, and just find areas that are still not quite working right, and you might as well just rework it. Sometimes if you rework areas you hate, whether that be like going completely back to the drawing board or just covering it up, sometimes they end up being your favorite areas. So I'm noticing a lot of repetition of that shape caused by the way that bark terminates, so I'm trying to disguise it as well as I can and just keep moving these pieces around, panning with tilde, just moving it up and down to try and imagine how it would be going up and down the tree. There are a few problem areas now caused by the curves. I'm going to try and fill some of these out with geometry. I kind of like the way some of these are weaving in and out, kind of curving in, then counteracted by contradictory shape and angle. It's going out at a slight opposite direction, or sometimes they converge or flow in a similar way. Sometimes when you add these things, they do weird stuff, so you just gotta sort of slowly rotate them until they look correct. This right here, I want it all to be like this giant movement, kind of from the top to the bottom. So you flow in and then down to the left. And if we have any problems where, yeah, the repetition's too much, it's no problem. We can just continue to just add shapes and cover them up. Okay, see there, I'm filling in that space with a slightly different shape. because there were too many similar patterns forming, so I just added that in there. Just keep looking around for too much repetition and find ways to just cover it up. It's really amazing when you think about it. We just used one tool. We created this whole texture. Like I said, it's not perfect, but by either doing overlays in ZBrush or in Substance, you're going to be able to hide all that. See there, I was trying to see how crazy I wanted to get with the angles. I thought about having it curve way out, but the problem there is that when I capture that normal will be a lot harder angle, because you'll be seeing the just the glancing angle of it, so it'll be just stand out worse. Another trick is to grab your tool and go Z sub and then drag that. See, if you notice there, I was checking my height map and there was a really bright spot, so what I did is I took my tool, did Z sub, and I drug it over there to remove the shapes.